Okay, we're going to give we'll do this pretty much the way we usually do. We'll give a PowerPoint presentation, then after we're done with that, we'll play a very short, maybe 3 or 4 minute set of slides set to music of Peru, and then we will be happy to answer any questions you have in the chat. So, shall we get going?
Let's go.
Okay. Any of you who've seen our programs before know that I like to set the scene by talking a bit about the geography and the geology.
Before you go there, as the slide says, Phil and I included 3 trips to Peru in these slides. So you can see it's over 20 years between the first and the second, or the last rather. So there's some time lag here, but hopefully that doesn't make a difference.
You'll see some pictures of us when we look younger than we are now.
That's true. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so Peru, this is Peru. It's a long, slender country with a bulge in the Amazon region, and it's got three primary climate regions. One, it's got a very arid coast. This little skinny strip along the coast is very arid. That's where Lima is, the primary city where probably 30 or 40% of the population lives. Almost half the population lives in this very arid strip near the coast. You may wonder why the coast is so arid. I mean, it's right on the Pacific Ocean. You would think it would have a fair amount of moisture, but there is a cold water current called the Humboldt Current that flows up from Antarctica. And cold water is very dense. It doesn't evaporate easily. So there's very little moisture evaporating off the ocean in that spot, and along the coast. As a result, it's very arid. And in fact, you can see on the right-hand side, this is the rainfall. The very dark orange is low rainfall. You can see particularly on the southern coast, where the Humboldt Current is right next to the coast. It's very, very dry. As the Humboldt Current kind of sways away a bit toward the west, in the upper region, in the northern aspect of Peru, you have a more narrow range of low rainfall. Then next to that, you have the Andes. So the Andes rise up, forming a big barrier. And then beyond that, you have the Amazon basin. And the Amazon basin has just 9% of the population. You could see it's probably 40% of the land mass, but very few people live there compared to the other 2 areas. The Andes were 43%, and the coastline where almost 50% live. Okay, so how did it form? It is on the Pacific Ring of Fire, and you have the Nazca Plate here moving east. And the Nazca Plate is being drawn under, or subducted as they call it, underneath the South American Plate. And as the plate is drawn down, the pressure increases, the heat increases, and it melts. And it rises up, this hot magma rises up and forms volcanoes. So you have 2 processes occurring. One is that the Nazca Plate is crunching into the South American Plate. Imagine a throw rug on a smooth wooden floor, and you're pressing with your hand on the throw rug. What happens? It gets crumpled up. And that crumpling is the Andes. Well, the Andes is also not just crumpled, but it has all this magma, this hot magma flowing up from the melting Nazca Plate, and so you have volcanoes in it as well. So these are all volcanoes around the Ring of Fire in the Pacific. And there is the Andes going up, going through Mexico, becoming the Rockies in the US, all along that Ring of Fire. The particular kind of volcanoes you have, they're explosive volcanoes. The magma is very dense, it's full of silica, it's full of gas, so when it comes out, it forms explosive volcanoes. Think Mount St. Helens. Those are the kind of volcanoes that we have in the Andes. So that's the geography, the 3 regions. You will see all 3, and so we'll start in Lima.
Okay. Lima, as you probably know, is the capital and the largest city in Peru. It's got a population that's over 9 million. It could be as close to 11 million if you count the suburbs right around it. And we show a couple pictures here. The two on the left-hand side, the boy on the skateboard and looking down the coast, are taken from a wealthier area and called Miraflores. And you know, Phil said that this is a very arid area and has very little rainfall, but yet Miraflores, referring to flowers, look how green and lush it is. Well, you wonder, where does all the water come from? At least I did when I went there. How are you getting all these things watered? And it turns out a lot of it's coming from the creeks and the rivers that are draining from the Andes, and they're draining the ones that drain into the Pacific. The Amazon, on the other hand, drains the other way. It drains towards the Atlantic, but there are some that still drain into the Pacific. Lima is, as we said, it's very populated. It's one of the 30 most populated urban centers in the world. And I want to talk about the picture at the top. So when I was out walking in Miraflores, and I've got near the Lima Medical School, all along there, the school, or actually I think it's the administration building for the school, is surrounded by a fence. It's a nice bit of property. And on that fence are all these pictures of people. And this is the pictures, and this is a memorial to all the doctors who died during COVID-19. Peru took a really bad hit for COVID, for the number of deaths, particularly with respect to their population. It was a very high percentage. And on the bottom right picture, that's a picture from an outskirts near one of the wetlands that Phil and I went to one of our trips to go see some birds. And this was an area that's on the outskirts. It's sort of developing. It doesn't look so great. But also the idea of leaving areas on top, finishing off only so many floors and leaving the other part open, is a matter of money. First of all, how much money do you have to complete so many floors? And if you're not going to use them and you can't complete them, then you don't pay taxes on that living area. So there's a twofold reason, only complete what you need and what you're going to use. While we were in Lima, we went to the Museo Larco, and I know Phil and I went there very early on one of our earlier trips, and we were not that impressed, but the museum has been reorganized. Larco went throughout the world. Actually, they were many of their artifacts were on exhibit throughout the world, and he went along and he would see what the exhibits were like, and he questioned the different museums they went to and how they were exhibiting, and he brought back a lot of ideas from that, and they redid their own exhibits, and it's a beautiful museum. You got a burial armor on the left. In the center, there are Incan counting devices. They're counting. It's called a quipu, which means knot, probably in Quechua. And so that's how you're counting. There were different colors on it, and they meant different things. So that's how you keep your inventory. And of course, some of the pots and things on the right. And one of the things that was interesting here is gold to the Incas wasn't so much a matter of wealth as a matter of status. So you're buried in gold because that is where it's important for the gods to know that you have good status and they should take good care of you. So it's a very interesting part, and it was quite a dichotomy or a difference when the Spaniards came, their attitude towards gold versus the Incan attitude towards gold.
Okay, from Lima we went up to the Andes, and this was both on our first 2001 trip and our last 2022 trip. The middle trip we just stayed on the Amazon, but on the two end trips we went up to the Andes. You can see on the right, this was our first trip, and these are the altitudes we were at. And the itinerary on the second trip was a little different, but pretty close to this. The first trip I was able to tolerate it pretty well. The second trip when we were in Cusco's at 11,000 some odd feet. Then we went up to Sacsayhuaman, which is on a plateau outside the city. I had a hard day. It happened to be my birthday, but nonetheless, it was a pretty hard day.
And you were 21 years older. So.
That's right. So it was, the altitude is very difficult.
But you can see we went from Lima, which is at sea level, right up to like 11,000 feet to Iquitos. We quickly started to
Cusco.
To Cusco. And then we started to come on down a little bit, but gradually. So, and of course, when you get to Machu Picchu, you start to feel a lot better because you've come down to about 7,000 feet.
Yeah, Machu Picchu is actually on the saddle between two mountains, and so you're significantly lower. So here we go. We'll take you through the Andes.
In the Sacred Valley. Our first stop on the last trip was to Moray. We didn't visit Moray on the first trip. And matter of fact, I didn't even know about Moray. But there's 3 sets of circular tiers, and they are stepped like that. And what the archaeologists have found was they found seeds, and they found seeds on different levels from different kinds of plants. And they believe it was a possible agricultural research site. The terraces make like a greenhouse in the sense that different elevations and different terraces have different climate, primarily different temperatures. So there can be a significant change in temperature. And one of the reasons why the Incas may have had something like this is the Inca, he was responsible for the well-being of the people, including feeding them in the case of drought or famine. So it's important that they had crops to repopulate areas and or to make sure they knew where they could grow these crops and then feed the population. So they needed something like this. And I was impressed with this site.
It was an interesting site. I mean, you're truly out in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, we went to a restaurant near there, which is so isolated that they only take reservations at least 48 hours ahead so that they can order the supplies, the food to make your meal.
And it's a fixed menu.
It's a fixed menu. We had a wonderful meal there in our little section on that's set to music. You'll see some pictures from that restaurant, a very scenic spot, but truly nothing around it.
Okay.
Ollantaytambo is another archaeological ruin. It's in the Sacred Valley. The Urubamba Valley is considered the Sacred Valley, the Urubamba River Valley. And this is another spot that there was a lot of speculation about the purpose. It's the only Incan town that's been continuously inhabited. It's still inhabited. You'll see the next slide, some of the features of the current town. And it was probably a way station for travelers. It was on the Incan road that leads throughout the Andes, throughout the Incan Empire.
It also might have had military reasons too, because it looked like it could be outposts looking down into the valley. It overlooks the Urubamba Valley. And it could have been an agricultural center as well. They had all the terraces, and their terraces were set up with an irrigation system. So that was basically gravity fed. And so it might have had many different purposes, and it could have been a religious and a royal community. But it is still an existing town. It's pretty interesting that way.
So you can see here that
on the
right-hand side, the water supply system is still operating. The water is flowing by gravity, and it's used for irrigation.
And this particular street is a typical old Incan street still. Okay, so there are other streets in other areas of the town that have been rebuilt. Now the stuff above, that looks like cement, that was built above on top of the what was left from the Inca time.
The granary, as you can see on the left-hand side, is up on the mountain. The thinking is that if there were battles and there were marauders coming in, it would be harder for them to steal all the grain.
And another thought was that up on the mountains, it was breezier and airier, and therefore less likely for the grains to rot. We kept them well ventilated. And then we have a woman in the middle, and it turns out the dress, the colors, the patterns on her weaving and her hat, they all are distinctive to her particular clan, the area that she comes from.
And then we went along and we saw a weaving collective, and women from this weaving collective came in to demonstrate their weaving principles. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Okay. They started the collective. I don't know the name of the woman who started it, but they started the collective because, and basically a school, because they found that they felt that the weaving traditions were dying out. And yet they knew some of the women in the area were doing traditional weaving. So they wanted to re-engage the community and actually maintain this culture and this craft. So they started this collective in the school, and then by having a collective like this, the women get together and the products they make then are sold, and they did sell them there. That was part of it. They gave us the demonstration of them spinning the wool, dyeing the wool, and of course weaving the wool, and they also knitted as well, and then there were objects for you to buy.
At that same location, we saw a demonstration of Peruvian paso horses. These are gorgeous horses that are actually trained. Let's see if this works properly. They have a very smooth gait. If this video works properly, you'll see that this fellow on the right is hardly bouncing at all. If I can get this, come back.
Already 4 years old. So she has more training than the other one. And you can tell it's a little much bigger, eh? Yeah. The rider is called Chamac.
Okay, you can see very smooth. They're bred and trained for that particular trait.
And it takes them years to get them to be like this level. I mean, they had horses that were early on in their training, midway on their training, and then well into the training. And I think it takes like 5 to 6 years for them to really train them up well. And of course, the horses came over with the conquistadors.
With Pizarro in 1531. Before that, we had no horses in the New World.
And they were bred over centuries for the smoothness of their gait, and they were actually protected under Peruvian law. They're part of their cultural heritage, sort of like the Icelandic horses.
Icelandic horses, yeah. Oops, come on. Next slide. Okay. Now we're at Machu Picchu, and this really was the target of our tour in the Amazon. I mean, Machu Picchu is absolutely spectacular. Becky is much more of an archaeology person than I am, but I have to admit, even I was just blown away by these ruins. The site in the saddle between the two mountains, Huayna Picchu in front of you on the far side above the lower terrace. It's just a spectacular location.
So it is surrounded on 3 sides by the Urubamba River, and on the right photo, if you look down there, you can see the muddy Urubamba River. It's muddy because it's really flowing. It's like torrential at places.
And the train.
And then there's the train, and we came up by train. You can hike up, but that's not us. So we came up on the train, which is a couple hours to come up by the train, and then you go back by the train. So most people who come up to Machu Picchu stay in Machu Picchu Pueblo, which is down a little lower near where that train is, and they stay there for 1 or 2 nights, and they take the bus up the hill to the site. Now, we actually took the bus up the hill and stayed at a beautiful hotel right outside of the park, the national park, or the archaeology. So we were right there by the gate, so we could go right in the morning. So that was really nice. And Machu Picchu gets over 1 million visitors a year, and they actually limit how many can go in at any one time or any day.
It was nice to be able to get in early to take some of these pictures with fewer people. Although even with fewer people, it took 10 minutes per shot for me to erase all the people in the picture.
So you notice again, it's built on terraces, and there was a higher area that was for the elite or the royal, and then there was a lower area, and that was for the common people or the worker bees. And they believe that some of this, from what they found in the archaeological digs, they found that some of the buildings were probably used as like schools or education for crafts or trades. And by the way, this one tree in the front here, point out that tree fell down there.
Come back.
That one tree there, that tree probably wasn't there. They believe that's probably grew up from one of the workers, from one of the people doing the archaeological dig.
And another couple of views. I mean, you can see just how spectacular the site is. On the left, you have the door to the citadel. This was the opening to an area that was fortified.
And you can see there are these hewn or cut stones that are fit together with no mortar, and they sit right on top of each other. The Inca were well known for, and many of the different clans and tribes building up to the Inca, for their building ability, for being able to build these buildings and that could withstand earthquakes. Remember, this is in an area that is earthquake prone.
Okay, and now we're back to Cusco.
Okay, so we're near the Urubamba River, or valley. We're about 11,000 feet. We've got the major church on the upper right here. And some of you may hear me talk about that church. You can't take pictures in the church, but one of the things in that church is a picture of the Last Supper. And the people who painted it were, well, the Spanish taught the local Incans or local indigenous people to paint in the Spanish style of the time. And they did a lot of the artwork then. But it was limited who you could put in a picture because most of the people look very Spanish. They don't look like the indigenous people. But in this picture, the Last Supper, it has a lot of political meaning in it. First of all, when they found out it's a special supper, it was a special meal. The artists included what would be a special meal in Cusco, and that would be to have guinea pigs. So there is a roasted guinea pig in the picture of the Last Supper in this church.
We tried guinea pig on our first trip there. Tastes like chicken.
Yeah, it didn't taste like chicken, but it tasted good. But in any case, and the other thing about it was the person who played Judas Iscariot, the story changed from one time I was there to the next over the 20 years. So they did more, as more and more was learned. And they think now it was actually the picture of one of the men at the time who was fomenting unrest against the Spaniards. Anyway, so it was the capital of the Inca Empire. There was a lot of gold in some of the buildings. You can see the wall over here on the left is built and in the Inca style with no mortar, just clean-cut bricks or blocks stacked on top of each other. And there are earthquakes in Cusco. Some people say maybe one every 3 minutes, that kind of stuff. We didn't actually experience one, but they have many earthquakes. And one of them that was pretty powerful, it actually destroyed or put cracks in the foundation of the upper part of the building that was built by the Spaniards. But the foundation walls built by the Incas remained and were solid.
We stayed in a very unusual hotel, and it's the Hotel Monasterio, built in the 1500s as a monastery, and it's been maintained. I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous. You can see this room on the left. That's where we had dinner. There's a view of us at our table with our friends, and it's just a gorgeous room. They had opera singers walking around singing.
This particular hall was built so that it would have wonderful acoustics, and they did have opera. For this particular dinner, they had opera singers. This
is the courtyard of the hotel with Cusco rising up the hill in the background. Very scenic, very beautiful. It's just unfortunate it's at such a high altitude because it's harder to enjoy when you have trouble tolerating that. And then we went outside the city to a fortress, Sacsayhuaman. These are all hand cut and hand moved. And this is Becky from our earlier trip. You can see just how big these rocks are. I mean, it's hard to imagine how they quarried them and moved them and cut them.
And that's not a trick with perspective. That's me standing right next to that stone. So
that's right. And you can see that we're even higher than Cusco. If you look down on the lower left, we're up on a plateau over the city, looking down at the city.
And Sacsayhuaman was supposed to have been a fortress, a citadel, overlooking the city and protecting the city.
Okay.
And now we're ready to depart Cusco in December of 2022. And this was one of the first times we hit unrest in a country.
You know, we've been on many, many trips to third world countries, but we never landed in a country before. And no sooner do we land than they impeach and arrest and incarcerate their president, and they start having riots in the street, and they start closing airports. This was new to us.
Well, but we were lucky because it turns out the unrest started in the South. I think that's where the president's largest population was. And we are sort of, in Cusco, we're sort of southernly there. And they hadn't closed the airport yet, thank goodness. And also,
they hadn't closed the train to Machu Picchu.
right, so we were already out of Machu Picchu because later on, we're going to fly down from Cusco to Lima and Lima to Iquitos in the Amazon. But by the time we got down to Iquitos in the Amazon, they were starting to close the airport, and they stopped the train, and people got stranded up in Machu Picchu. And think about it, many people go up there thinking they're only going to be there a night or two, and now you're stuck there. Do you have enough drugs? And if you're there even longer than you thought your trip was going to last, do you have enough food and things? Because they have to bring in a lot of that.
They couldn't transport food up there. They couldn't transport drugs up there. The train was stopped, and the train is the primary means of getting people in and out and getting produce and food and drugs in and out.
So when we were ready to leave, so our whole trip was 2 weeks. So this would have been a week after we left Cusco. We were ready to leave Lima and fly home. In the airport behind us, I was talking to the woman waiting online to board, and it turns out they had just come down from Machu Picchu. She showed me pictures, and she said, well, the train wasn't running, but whatever company they were with, I think they were with A&K. And they actually made a platform on some train wheels that could put the people and their luggage. Now, most people didn't have much luggage because you'd go up there for a day or two. So they put them on there, and I don't know who pushed them, pulled them, or whatever, because, although it might be downhill, it's up and downhill. So I don't know how they actually how it was moved, but that's how they got out of Machu Picchu.
Fortunately, we
missed it.
We missed that, but
we did not have any problems in the Amazon, and we did not have any problems getting out of Lima.
But it was a close call.
Right. Anyway,
Amazon Basin. We've been to the Amazon Basin on all 3 trips. Very similar itineraries. We flew from Lima to right about here. That's Iquitos right there. So here's Iquitos. You fly from Lima, and then on one occasion we went a couple days early and went to a lodge. I think it was up in this direction.
I think it was the other way.
Yeah, in this direction. Stayed there for a couple days. Came back to Iquitos and took a ship up the Marañón, up the Ucayali, and on the second and third times, the first and third times, we flew into Iquitos, took a ship once from Iquitos, and another time from Nauta, which is right about where the cursor is, just past the junction of the Marañón and the Ucayali. So on all 3 times, we followed a very similar route, a little bit up the Marañón, and all the way up the Ucayali.
And then back.
And then back, of course, to Iquitos to fly home.
So the Amazon Basin, it drains about an area that's about 2.4 million square miles. I mean, not all in Peru, but that area up that you see in the map on the upper left. And it drains it all to the Atlantic Ocean. Many, many years ago, millions of years ago, it actually drained to the Pacific, but then the uplift of the Andes, it drains to the Atlantic. So it's a long river. It's about 4,000 miles from the source in the Peruvian Andes, because it starts up in the Andes, then they drain down into the basin, and as it goes its way all the way through to Brazil and out at Belém out there. And that's about it.
We've been on the Amazon in 3 different areas. Our first trip was actually out of Manaus in Brazil, and we've been 3 times on the Peruvian Amazon, and where's Ecuador? Once
Napo.
On the Napo, another tributary in Ecuador.
So,
Here we are in Iquitos. Iquitos is pretty much surrounded, just about surrounded by water. It's not an island, but it's very isolated. It's I think the only major city, about a 500,000 population, it's the largest city in the world not reachable by road.
so you either come in by air or by boat. And their economy is basically transporting logs, agricultural products, and then tourism.
And originally it was a rubber city. Rubber is really what made it, made the economy go way back 100 years ago.
And what brought in some of the beautiful buildings from that era that show, all the ornate metalworks. And then, as Phil says, at least for this last trip, well, the other trips we stopped in Nauta from the ship, but this time we actually drove from Iquitos to Nauta, which is about a 3-hour drive.
To pick up the ship.
To pick up the ship in Nauta. And Nauta has the central market there. It's a place where you can buy anything. It's the place where you buy everything. So there's a lot of good fish, various kinds of fish. There's so many kinds of fish coming out of the Amazon. It's where you get your fruits, your vegetables, and you can get your clothing and whatever else there too.
But you're right next to the Amazon, so you get a lot of fish, and you're right next to the rainforest, so you get a lot of produce. Those are the two big things that you can find in an outer market.
You want to talk about the frugivores?
Oh, sure. There is so much fruit in the rainforest that a lot of the birds and even the animals
And the fish.
And the fish eat fruit. So you have a lot of frugivores, which is good. The fruit is conspicuous, it's easy to catch, it's abundant, and it's there all year. However, it's low in protein, and it's got a very fruity pulp, so you get thirsty and you have to drink a lot of water. Some of it is indigestible, even poisonous. Some of the seeds, for example. So if you're a specialist in fruit, you have to have some adaptations to deal with it. And you're vulnerable to any decline in your particular specialty fruit, if it goes out of season or if there's a drought. So there are pros and cons, but there are a lot of fruit eaters in the Amazon: mammals, fish, and birds.
And people.
And people.
And this is a picture of the typical Amazon. I mean, there's 16,000 species of trees here.
And they all look the same.
They look very much the same. They all have drip tips on their leaves. They don't have a lot of lobing. Instead, they usually have they taper off so that the water can run off and drip off the end of the leaf.
It rains a lot, so they're all adapted to handle rain, and they want to be able to have the water run off them very easily and not take all the nutrients out of the leaf.
It's such a large river system that some places on the river can be in the dry season, while other places on the river can be in the rainy season. And it's a tropical soil. It's nutrient poor. Its nutrients are leached out by constant rain and heat. And and any vegetation that falls down is immediately absorbed, broken down by insects, fungi, bacteria. And the trees and plants have shallow roots that usually span out, and they're absorbing as much nutrients that way. And of course, some are getting their nutrients from the air, from the sky.
And the tide is unbelievable. From the low season to the high season, in some areas can be 45, 50 feet. So it'll flood an entire area of the forest, and they even have a name for it, the Varzea.
And 1% of the nutrients is in the soil. The rest is in all the vegetation. So if you think about it, and someone takes a plot of land and they clear cut it and then burn it, which is, slash and burn type of clearing for tropical land, you've just destroyed 99% of the nutrients. So it's a very delicate environment.
So we'll show you our 3 ships now. This is the 2001 ship, and look at the kitchen. I mean, it was rustic, but it was clean, it was comfortable.
And we got very good meals out of there. And, here we are. We have a ship that has about 14 cabins, 14 to 16 cabins. They're air conditioned. We're air conditioned in the upstairs here where it's glassed in. That's our dining room. Down here was the kitchen. Upstairs was the observation deck and the bar. You'll see the others have a similar style.
Yeah, like living quarters on top of something that looks like a ship. You'll
Okay, so yes, but hopefully you'll see them get better. Okay.
So the second one, you can see the kitchen looks, whoops, got that out. Kitchen looks a little better. It's a little more luxurious. The layout is the same though, very similar, you can see. And then our last trip, this was clearly the fanciest.
This was luxury.
This was luxurious.
This was the Delphine 2. And this is the kitchen. You could, and it had a beautiful dining room.
Compare that kitchen to the first kitchen. I mean, this is night and day, but look at the ship on the lower right. It's really a very similar layout, even though it's much fancier.
And then, and this is probably one of the largest cabins we ever had.
We've been on a lot of cruises, and we go on these, we don't go on luxury cruises. This was by far the biggest and the most luxurious cabin we've ever had. So it was fun. All three were fun. We've enjoyed all our trips, but
I think we were going the right way. So now you see Phil on the upper left when he was much younger.
That's 21 years ago.
Holding a baby spectacle cane.
Yeah, that's right. I wrestled that. It was a fierce struggle. And here I am in the middle, I think on our 2016 trip, having caught a piranha. We went fishing for piranha.
And we ate them.
We ate them for dinner.
And they're good. The nice white sweet meat, but you got to watch out, they're bony. And then you see how we got around basically in motorized boats. And typically dinner eating could be out on a deck, or it could be down in the dining room or up in the dining room.
There's a certain rhythm to these trips. You get up, you normally have one outing before breakfast because they want to take you out early.
Before it's too hot.
You come back, you have breakfast, you lounge around, and then maybe 3-4 o'clock, you have another outing in one of these small boats when it's cooled down and the sun's gone low enough that you're not roasted.
So in between there, you're resting. They might have a program for you, whatever, some educational stuff.
Okay, on our second trip, the middle trip, the 2016 trip, we visited, when we stayed at the lodge, this was not off the ship, we visited an indigenous village. And, I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, it's, this is one of their primary sources of income for this village. The lodge that brought us there pays them to, do a show for us. But it's kind of awkward. You can see in this one that the woman in traditional dress, they have nothing on under the thatch. And the older women are accustomed to that, but some of the younger women clearly felt awkward about it, and I didn't really feel good about taking photos.
But right, because several of them, and part of it's trying to keep their clan and their village together.
And their traditions.
And their traditions. And a lot of their young people are going off to get jobs on the riverainos. They be whatever they can do on the river.
But you can see that we had a blowpipe demonstration, and here I am giving it a try, and I'll have you know that I hit the target. One shot, my first shot. I stopped there. I rested on my laurels.
Life on this typifies life on the Amazon. There's so much water, and water is your way around. It's your road. It's your source for food. It's everything. In the bottom left, you see a man making a canoe. He's by hand, but you see the young man there. He's fishing. He's got a huge fish in the upper left.
Yeah, you can see that fish. It's just enormous.
And down below is like a ferry, taking people and or goods back and forth up and down the river. And the one on the upper right is the family. And the people live on the river, and we said, the river rises and falls, so you have to often put your house on stilts, or your settlement is way up on a high bankment with steps cut into the mud so that you can get up there. And most of the children have to learn to swim early on because it's vital for their survival, and also to be able to manage a canoe.
Here's a fisherman. We passed any number of fishermen holding up an armored catfish. One of the local, I mean, they're very common, these armored catfish. Just to give you a sense, I mean, you can see this is a poor country. On the upper right, it's one of the typical river houses. The gross domestic product per capita is about $7,000. So
you can bet it's much higher than that in Lima and the big city. So it's much lower than that.
Half of that in the Amazon. But compare that to the United States. The GDP per capita in the United States is about $70,000. So 10 times as wealthy.
And what you have in the upper left is people on their houseboat. So they live on there, but they probably also have someplace up or down river. They probably have a plantation, so they're bringing things to market, produce probably to market. And then they had a big logging industry, and
some of which is illegal.
Illegal, right. And then we went to a second village. Now this village was near Nauta. It wasn't that far from Nauta. And their school there is the center of the community. They have school that goes from kindergarten up through high school. And this community is a little different in that perspective. Not all the communities, they often had an elementary school, but not a high school. So many students came from nearby villages to get to their high school. Their kids were just starting their winter break around Christmas time, I guess, or what time was it? Okay, yeah. And here they are, they're hanging out for the cameras. They're used to the cameras. Our tour group brought us on here. They also, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the organization, but there's an organization that helps them. And actually the way it helps them is it helps them to build small businesses like agroforestry. Meaning you take a plot of land and you grow some hardwoods like mahogany for long-term investment, because that takes a while to grow, but that's a very pricey, money-rich export once you grow it. But also it might have some corn or something else that grows fast. So they're doing all kinds of projects with them, and the kids are involved in it from a young age.
Okay, Becky and I are mostly nature photographers. So you're not going to see a program like this without seeing a bunch of nature slides. First, we have the Victoria water lilies. These are about 9 feet across. I mean, they're enormous pads. And this is on the lower right is what the outside of the lily pad looks like. These are protective spines. These lily pads, they don't want birds and fish and aquatic mammals to be eating them. So they do their best to discourage that. And these spines are one way they do it.
I think it also helps to
buoyancy.
Yeah, for buoyancy and to spread out their surface.
Butterflies. I mean, the butterflies in the tropics are just unbelievable. The heliconia, these three on the top and the lower right are all in the same family, the long-winged family. And this is a morpho on the lower left. Morphos are really hard to photograph. They rarely light and spread their wings like that. They're always in flight. And if they do light, they usually close their wings so you don't see that beautiful iridescent blue. But after 100 attempts, we finally got a shot of a morpho like that.
And then I think one of the magnificent birds along the waterways, the black-collared hawk. It's pretty much throughout Central and South America, and it is a fish-eating hawk. That's its primary diet. So you'll see it go in and go after a fish.
Always around rivers and lakes, always around water.
A very unusual bird, the Watson. So they really do look odd, as if they've been, well, they look prehistoric. They're primitive birds of the tropics.
And they're physically primitive as well. I mean, they're just so unusual. Compound stomachs, because they're eating leaves, and leaves are hard to digest, but their diet is primarily leaves. So they have a compound stomach to help them digest all these leaves. In fact, they have bacteria in their stomach that ferment the leaves as part of their digestion. And then horned screamers. These are also strange looking birds. They look like geese with big plumes on top of their heads, readily domesticated, and people use them as guard birds because they start screaming and squawking if somebody intrudes.
So if you're in the tropics like this and you hear something that sounds like a donkey braying, it's a horned screamer.
Herons, loads of herons. The capped heron on the left looks something like one of our night herons, and the Kakoi heron very much looks like our great blue heron, although it's a different species.
But it has a similar niche.
Similar niche.
And then the striate heron, which is very much throughout the tropics, Central and South America. It's very similar in its niche as our green heron.
And in fact, it used to be considered the same species with our green heron and the lava heron in the Galapagos, but it's been split off as its own species.
And then there's all kinds of parrots, the macaws being some of the largest parrots. And they have that big bill, which could take off a finger. They're very powerful, but they eat large fruits and insects and seeds. So those are good for cracking those seeds. And the one on the bottom's at a clay lick. It's getting a drink, but it's also there to get some minerals from the clay.
Russet-backed Orapendula literally means golden tail. Ora meaning gold and pendula meaning tail. And it, as you can see, it's well named. They're large colonial nesters. They nest in these big colonies with these pendulous nests hanging down. It makes it difficult for predators to get at them. They have, if a monkey wants to eat them, it has to climb all the way out to the end of these very skinny branches, and it's difficult for them to do.
And then reach down into that nest. And also the ones that have higher status are sort of in the middle of the thicket of all these nests, so they have more protection. Everything else is around them.
And sometimes they'll actually nest in concert with wasps, so that will provide additional discouragement to any predators.
And then the monkeys. So these are called owl or night monkeys, and they are susceptible to malaria. So they've used them in the research for malaria. They are the cutest could be. They've got those big orangey eyes for that night vision.
You can tell they're nocturnal. I mean, their eyes occupy half their face, it seems like.
Right. And then the squirrel monkey, which acts, when you see it going through the forest and through the treetops, it reminds people a lot of how a squirrel would act. And so therefore they call it a squirrel monkey. But you want to talk about, so these are all New World monkeys. So their faces their snouts aren't quite so long. They're little shorter faces, flatter face.
Nostrils point toward the side. New World monkeys are different from Old World monkeys in certain characteristics. One primary one is that the New World monkeys have prehensile tails.
Right.
Old World monkeys, like chimpanzees, do not.
And then on the right was a woolly monkey. That was a baby monkey that took to our friend Gloria. The titi monkey, which is a pretty big monkey here. It has that long furry tail. And then the Saki monkeys. The Saki monkeys are these long-haired monkeys. So they have long fur on them and the bushy tail like that.
They're unusual looking. I mean, if you look at this, it doesn't look like a typical monkey.
And they're usually diurnal, these monkeys.
And then tapirs. These are as big as a small horse. I mean, this adult on the right is probably 3 or 4 feet high at the shoulder.
And muscular, all muscle.
Stocky.
Oh.
And even though they look like pigs, they're much more closely related to horses and rhinos than they are to pigs. And this is...
Excuse me. Let me just turn that off.
This is a juvenile, the striped one on the left. They can swim too. We've seen them swim across the Amazon where just their snout is sticking up.
And then we have the sloths, and this is a brown-throated, 3-toed sloth. You can tell the 3 toes. To know whether it's a 3-toed or 2-toed sloth, you have to see the front paws. front feet. And this brown-throated three-toed sloth has this facial pattern that makes it look like it's smiling.
And that is the end of our PowerPoint. And what we will do now is I'll close this, and we're going to play a very short, it's about 3.5 minute set of Peruvian slides set to music. Just so we didn't repeat the same slides, we supplemented our pictures with pictures from our friends Suzanne Bennett Johnson and Ellen and Jack Moskowitz. So you'll see some of their slides mixed in with ours.
One second, we have to we'll stop sharing too.